Hey guys, Stephanie with AmericanMuscle.com here with an install and review of the Ford Performance Track lowering springs for 2015 and up S550 GT and EcoBoost Mustangs. We're going to be talking about a few different things with these springs, but mostly we'll talk about what you can expect from these springs in both the performance and looks categories, and we're also going to talk about the install as well. I'll talk more about the install later, but you're looking at a 2 out of 3 wrenches in the difficulty meter. The Ford Performance Track lowering springs are going to be a good option for those of you out there that are looking for a lowering spring that's going to provide aggressive handling. These springs are specifically designed for track use and track-like handling, and they're made to be used with the Ford Performance shocks and struts, not your factory shocks and struts. These springs offer a drop of 1 inch all the way around the car, and as far as lowering, this is what I consider more on the standard side in the world of lowering springs for the S550. Currently, you tend to see that the majority of springs offer a standard 1 inch drop, and that's because this chassis doesn't need a big drop in order to see some improvements. Even though that is the case, these springs are going to be compatible with both the factory and aftermarket wheel and tire setups. The plus side of the S550 looking so good and responding so well to a little bit of lowering is that you can create a functional low. So it's low enough to look good, but not low enough to cause issues either on the tire or under the car. It's going to leave you with a very streetable car still. And of course, a lowering spring is going to lower the center of gravity to provide some handling improvements, like reducing squat and body roll in corners, and eliminating nosedive under hard braking. Just keep in mind that the drop that these springs offer will look a touch different depending on your exact wheel and tire setup. The other thing to consider when you're shopping for springs, besides the drop, is ride quality. These springs do have a performance design, and they're made for track use only. They're also made to be used with the Ford Performance aftermarket shocks and struts, so you can bet that these are going to give you a much different ride quality. You can expect a much firmer ride with the shocks and struts in these springs. I wouldn't describe it as a bad ride quality, but you will notice a big difference. As far as price, these springs are going to cost between $200 and $300, which is right where the majority of other springs are falling as well. Of course, there are some springs that are either less expensive or more expensive than that, so be sure to check out all of your options so you can make sure that you're choosing the right spring for you. So the install here is going to take about 4 hours, and I'm going to call it a solid 2 out of 3 wrenches in the scale because you will need some knowledge to complete this install. So I'd recommend having a knowledgeable helping hand or taking the car to a shop for the install if you haven't done this before, especially since it's always a good idea to get an alignment after the install anyway. The install can be done on jack stands if you don't have access to a lift, but as usual, a lift would be your best bet here. You're going to need a few tools, including a spring compressor, so make sure you have that before you start the install. You're going to need to get down to the spring and strut assembly, so everything like the wheels, the brakes, the ABS lines will need to be moved out of the way so you can pull the assemblies out of the car. The spring compressor will help you remove the spring from the strut and install the new front springs, which are compressed and installed the same way. The strut assemblies go back in the same way they came out, and the install is the same for both sides. The rear is nearly the same. You'll need to disassemble some items to get to the springs, but ultimately you'll be able to lower the rear axle to the point where the springs will be free. Just like the front, the rear springs installed the same way that they were uninstalled. There's no surprises there. Your rubber insulators can be transferred over and new bump stops are installed, and after the new springs are in, you can begin reinstalling the shocks and everything else that you uninstalled. That's about all it's going to take. Like I mentioned earlier, a fresh alignment after the install isn't a bad idea. Wrapping things up here, the Ford Performance Track lowering springs offer a 1 inch drop, and they're a performance-based spring designed to be used with aftermarket Ford shocks and struts to give track-like handling performance. As always, I suggest you check these out more online for yourself, and for all things Mustang, keep it right here at AmericanMuscle.com.